Hi everyone, it's Katie from Moonflower Moments. So I just hit 300 subscribers yesterday and I just wanted to come in here and tell you thank you. I am so honored and excited to be part of this community and to get to talk about something that I really love with a group of other people that are on various paths in their journey. I feel like this has really reinvigorated my tarot practice overall. So I thought to celebrate, I would share with you a hashtag that I've been ruminating over for a while. So I'm going to call this one Astro Intro, with Astro standing for astrology. So the basic premise is you find your major placements in your birth chart and you match those placements with decks in your collection, and you use those decks to describe essentially who you are as a person. So specifically you're looking for your sun, your moon, your rising, your Mercury, your Venus, your Mars, and I also have a stellium, which is a placement with 3 or more planets in a particular house. So I'm going to throw that in there for bonus as well, because I feel like that's pretty significant in describing who I am. So the way that you typically find this out is you can load your birth date and your birth location and your birth time into a variety of apps. My personal preference is Horos, and Horos will give you a description of, say, what it means to have an Aquarius moon, right? And so you read that description and then you ask yourself, which one of my decks embodies that sort of characteristic? So obviously astrology is its own system, so it's going to be vast and it's going to be complex and it's going to be like tarot. So I'm going to do my best to represent the nuances of it while pairing it with tarot decks. But since this is my chart, I am going to focus more on the attributes of the planets that fit me the most. So with that being said, I'm also using this book as reference, The Stars Within You. So when I pull on these characteristics for these planets and their placements, most of my information will be coming from that book. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So the first deck I'm going to show I've had a while. Actually, all of the decks I'm going to show today I've had a while. I felt like it was important for me to pick decks that I have a deep relationship with, so that way I'm able to express the nuances of not only the astrology but also the tarot as well. So the first deck that I'm going to use is to describe my Cancer sun placement. So I am a Cancer, happy Cancer season, all my fellow Cancers. So I went ahead and picked Naturescapes for this one. So when I think of someone who is a Cancer sun, I typically think of someone who is really adept at feeling the emotions of the people around her. I also see someone who needs to retreat back to certain places time after time because there's that sense of nostalgia. And I also see someone who needs time to be introspective to see who she is. And so those are the main characteristics of a Cancer sun that I'm using to match with Naturescapes. So I think that this deck, the best part about it, and I've spoken about this before in some of my other videos, is that it's a deck that within the space of the landscape gives the reader an opportunity to breathe. And so I feel like when you're interacting with a Cancer sun, you're dealing with someone who typically is, we're talking positive qualities here, someone that is usually a very deep and intuitive listener. They're able to help you connect the different thoughts and the different ideas that you may be experiencing that seemingly are disconnected, but she's able to show you the patterns. And I think that Naturescapes fits this very well. Since there are no people listed in this deck, there's a sense of having the opportunity to breathe that I think a Cancer gives you. I also think that the most important thing to me as a Cancer sun is I love the feeling of nostalgia. And so I like to return to places time after time and reflect on how I've changed. So most recently we went to my dad's family property up in a location that's about 2 hours away from me. And I was just astonished by the fact that the property seemed much smaller than what it was when I was a child. I like to meditate on those feelings and those thoughts that I get within the places. And just like this deck, you can return to this deck time after time. The place stays the same for the most part, but you as a person has changed. And I think that's a sentiment that a Cancer sun would really appreciate. When I also think of Cancer suns, I think of someone who needs a deep retreat every now and again to understand who they are, right? Because Cancers absorb the emotions of those around them. And so I think that these images, these landscapes depict that retreat and give Cancer the opportunity she needs. Oh, that's weird, the last one's upside down. To really explore herself. So my Naturescapes is going to be my Cancer Sun deck. Now your moon is essentially your emotional center. It is who you are in your emotional landscape and the types of emotions and feelings and things that you're attracted to based off of that emotional landscape. So I have a sweet Taurus moon. I love my Taurus moon placement. And I know I've shared this deck before, but it just hits the spot for Taurus moon. This is Greenwitch. So when I think of someone that has a Taurus moon, I think of someone who desperately wants comfort and security, family and community. So being that this is a village of individuals, the person who is a moon in Taurus can really interact with these things and these people in a comforting way because she knows that she's part of a greater community that has her back. This deck also, with its rich like autumn tones, its real rich jewel tones, reminds me of the abundance and the lushness that a Taurus moon would crave. She's going to be someone who wants prosperity, and in a lot of these images we see people that are, you know, full-flushed in their harvest. So King of Pentacles, of course, he's going to be like a harvest card, right? But he has this beautiful cow behind him. Everything is in full bloom behind him. But it's not just the Pentacle cards that depict this. It's really all of them. It seems like the landscape is turned all the way up for most of these cards. The colors are turned all the way up. I think that Taurus is someone that feels things very deeply. And they're ultimately like very sensual creatures. So Taurus moons really are in tune with their body, which is why I love this King of Cups right here, because he's definitely in tune with the food that he's about to get. He's thankful for the abundance that's put in front of him. He likes the feeling of being in his own body. So there's a connection to earthly pleasures that's present in this deck. I think all of these people are very deeply in tune with the tangible, practical things around them, and they take enjoyment out of that. That being said too, I think that Taurus moons are people that can be a little bit rigid. I know that I can be. So when I get into an emotional state, I do hold on to that emotional state for a long time, even though I'm a Cancer too, so you know, we're known as moody. I think the Taurus moon definitely takes precedent. And there's a sense of rigidness to this. Because we're depicting a village, I don't really see many of these individuals as adventurers. It seems like the scope of the story happens within this village, and for these individuals, experiencing life within this village seems to be enough. You know, there's a sense of practicality to the day-to-day functions and the day-to-day routines that I think a Taurus moon would take comfort in. So my Greenwitch is my Taurus moon deck. So your ascendant or your rising is essentially the way that you come off to the world, so your outermost appearance. And mine would be in Virgo. I do really enjoy having all of these earth placements. I do feel like that's a major part of who I am, is being connected to the earth. So for my earth placements, I picked Herbcrafters for my Virgo rising. So there's a sense of wanting to care for the welfare of others that I think makes this the ultimate Virgo deck. So I am a teacher, so it's part of who I am that I want to care for others in a very meticulous sense. When someone is in my care, I really try to make sure to, you know, tap on that Cancer sun and really try to understand who they are emotionally. But I'm very meticulous throughout this process, which I think is true to the Virgo rising. So Virgos tend to be known as people that are analytical. And I think that Herbcrafters, in a sense, is very analytical because we're not looking at just plants in general. We're going through the properties of every single plant. And I am someone who enjoys studying. I think that's what people see of me as my rising, is that I'm someone who's very scholarly, very bookish. I always read a lot of nonfiction. And so something like this that is based in another subject, in another world, such as plants that you can learn about all the time, and there's never a real end to that learning, is very well suited for a Virgo rising like me. And not to mention, I think that the guidebook is really focused on trying to get you as an individual to step up to the plate and take care of other people. And Virgo, being the service worker that they are, would really resonate with that type of theology. So Herbcrafters is my Virgo rising deck. So next I'm going to move into the inner planets, which would be Mercury. Oop, no, sorry, that's mine. Okay, would be Mercury, Venus, and then Mars. And so my Mercury is in Cancer. Essentially, your Mercury rules your mind and your ability to communicate. So our Mercury sign indicates how we speak, how we learn, how we write, and how we reason, and basically how we exchange ideas and assimilate information. So my Mercury is in Cancer. That's my other Cancer placement, which I just love so much. And for it, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to pick the Gentle Tarot. I know we've all seen this deck, and we're probably all tired of it on Tarot too, but I'm not tired of it yet. And it fits perfectly. So when I'm in the classroom, I'm very like, I think true to Louisiana, this is kind of like a cultural thing or even a Southern thing to where I call people baby, I call people love, and it has nothing to do with like a romantic attachment, but when it comes down to it, my language and my words are just rich with feeling. They're just saturated with feeling. I'm definitely someone who's extremely expressionate, and I don't let my feelings hide from the rest of the world. So I had to pick Mercury and Cancer for this because I think that this deck is one that doesn't shy away from expressing feelings in full-blown saturation. The guidebook especially is one that gives gut punch after gut punch, not intentionally meaning to be hurtful or anything like that. It really is more of a gentle read, right? Hence the name Gentle Tarot. But like it knows what it needs to say to give you that message, but it's going to help you through it, just like a Mercury in Cancer would. I think a Mercury in Cancer, their aim is really to make people feel loved and to make people feel seen on a deep innermost level, the way that they wish that people would see them as a Cancer. And I think that this deck does that. It meets you where you are and it sees you for who you are. Mercury in Cancer to me is all about connection. And I think that this deck is another really great example of that, because we're not just connected to each other as individuals, but to animals as well. But this is a great card to illustrate my point. So essentially all of the people that are drawn out with these lines and are not fully fledged people, they're supposed to represent spirits. So you have the spirit of another moving and filling the cup of another spirit. So there's that sense of Two of Cups connection on a deep and meaningful level. I don't know. I'm just going to sit there and think about that for a second. I feel like that really describes Mercury in Cancer. I want to fill your cup, right? Just like this deck wants to, with the way that it communicates to the readers. So Mercury in Cancer has to be my Gentle Tarot. So the next planet I'm going to discuss is Venus, and I think that this is such a big one, right? Venus really rules love, creativity, and values, but essentially she is the ruler of everything that it means to be human. Like romance, pleasure, artistry, things like that. So when I think about my Venus is in Gemini, and I think about essentially the way that I communicate with others in a loving way. So this is a little bit different than the Mercury in Cancer, right? Because that's just my general communication style. This is primarily how I communicate with people that I consider to be like my intimate partners. I think with Venus too, it also is in control of your possessions. So the way that I interact with my possessions as well. So I went ahead and picked for my Venus in Gemini, I had to pick my Klimt Tarot. So I'm someone who has always began my relationships through communication first. My husband and I dated long distance for about 1.5 years, 2 years. And it actually worked for us because we're both talkers. He's a triple air sign. He has a lot of Gemini in his chart. I have a lot of Gemini in my chart. And so it worked for us. So there's that sense of, in order to win me over with love, you have to be someone who's able to engage me intellectually. I have to feel like the mind is coming through. And I think this fits with Klimt, right? Because Klimt takes imagery that is just it has a lot of touches of love in it. Like, look at this. This is a Two of Swords, but it's clearly two lovers that are in anguish with each other. It has a lot of sensual imagery that fits that Venus aspect, but the imagery is just a tiny bit off center. So everything's just a tiny bit choppy. And I think that describes the Gemini, right? Like Gemini, Venus and Geminis love to like flirt. So there's that sense of, you know, I'm going to give you that quick sense of attraction and connection that you're looking for, but I might not follow through. So there's that sense of like fickleness of, you know, to me, it's just fun to flirt without any follow through. So I think that Klimt would agree with that. You know, we have all of these images of people that are essentially in each other's embrace, but then the way that everything is depicted with these angular lines and jagged edges, it's almost as if you go to a person that is a Venus with Gemini seeking comfort, and then you end up in a situation to where you might get hurt because there's no follow through with that. So I think within my relationships, mental stimulation is necessary for me. And so the fact that the imagery is a departure from regular RWS or just really any other tarot that I've ever seen, that mental stimulation is there. So this is a deck that you can interact with 1,000 times and still feel like you don't get a complete grip on it. There's something that's slippery about it, almost as if a Gemini would be. And so I appreciate that every time I sit down to read with this, there's a different atmosphere and a new thought and a new idea that it's trying to teach me. So this was my beloved Klimt. So the last planet that I'm going to discuss is my Mars. So Mars is in charge of physical exertion, initiative, sexuality, style of aggression, our drive and our temperament, essentially what are our passions. So for obvious YouTube reasons, because this is a public platform, I'm going to talk mostly about my style of aggression, so my fighting style, and also my passions, and essentially what drives me. So my Mars is also in Gemini. I have a lot of Gemini in my chart, probably why I married someone who's a double Gemini. I think it makes sense. My mom is a Gemini. It's a natural energy for me, for sure. So for Mars and Gemini, I picked the William Blake Tarot, which is just such a glorious deck. I think this is within my top, like probably 3 favorite tarot decks. So I think someone that is a Mars, that has Mars and Gemini, is someone that exerts themselves primarily through matters of the mind. And I think it's someone who really prides themselves with their gift of like wit and debate. So being that I am an English teacher, I teach 12th grade dual enrollment classes. So I teach rhetoric, which is the art of audience awareness and knowing how to argue. So this is very true to me. I like arguments that are very logical in nature, which would fit Gemini. I like arguments that are very forceful, which would definitely fit that Mars element. I'm someone who enjoys like intellectual contest and like sparring. I like to debate. And I think that this deck is a great example of how. So for all of the minors, and not all of the minors, for most of the minors and for most of the court cards, we have these quotes that are directly from William Blake's poetry. And so I find that this is a great description of my fighting style, because by the time that I sit down to have that argument with you, I've already pre-thought out what I'm going to say. And so the argument probably has already been written down. I've already thought about it. So I'm coming to you with rhetoric already formed, with arguments that are already formed, with thoughts that are on the table. Being that my Mars is in Gemini, I would say that my fighting style is very aggressive, right? Because Mars is a fire planet, meeting Gemini, which is air. So there's that sense of combustion and sense of just like fire, just unraged fire. And I think William Blake is a great example of that. I have a friend of mine who like flinches when she sees this deck because she says it's just too much for her. The energy is too hectic. And honestly, this probably is what fighting is like for me. Also in true to Mars and Gemini, and this is not something that I should be proud of, but I will share it on here, I do kind of get a little bit nasty when I argue and a little unfair. I don't think through what I'm saying. It just kind of spills out of me. And so I think that that's definitely true to Gemini, someone who just says, and it could be very logical, but it could also be something that's not very kind to the other partner. So William Blake meets me here. I know that Dawn Michelle has talked about the deck she uses when she's like feeling angry or aggressive. This is my deck for that. I like engaging with wordplay when I'm mad, you know? It also describes like my drives and my ideas because this deck is very innovative. So for example, we have music here and we have fire along the outside. Music is not the fire suit. This is actually the water suit. So the borders do not match essentially what's being depicted. So this two of music, this is actually two of cups, right? Which stands for contraries, which does make sense if you have two people that are coming together that are that are getting married, or even in a relationship, you have essentially two contrary personalities coming together. So I think that this represents innovation because the deck doesn't just stand with the norm. It tries to push things with the suits. So you have that fiery nature of the air, that fire meeting that air, that creativity meeting the air in Gemini, that produces really innovative and creative thinking. All right, and then my last one. This is a bonus one. Not everyone is going to have this in their chart, but the way that you can tell if you have a stellium is by going to, on Horos, going to your overview page to see where your houses are. So your houses are essentially your chart that's divided into little pie slices. And within that, you can have your house overlaps with your constellation, and then also your planets are within your house. So a stellium is a house that has 3 or more planets, and it's pretty rare, especially if you have like 4 or more planets. I have a stellium that has 3. So my stellium is going to be in my 9th house, which the 9th house is associated with higher learning and with education and with philosophy and also traveling. So it essentially is kind of correlated a little bit with Sagittarius and all of the qualities you would assume with that sign. So in my stellium, it is in the sign of Taurus, but I have my moon, my Venus, and my Mars are all in my house 9. So that being said, I think that in general, I'm not going to go through every one of the planets because I already did that. We already discussed my moon, my Venus, and also my Mars. But I want to talk about house 9 in general and just how it's important to me. So I think that a house 9 stellium encourages in me to have a deep longing beyond the everyday. I've always been someone who enjoys traveling, someone who enjoys learning about other cultures. But being that the sign of my stellium is in Taurus, Taurus is something that's very rooted. And so the way that I typically learn about different cultures is through books and through learning. And so I had to pick, it was such an easy pick for me, the Spirit Keepers Tarot for this one. I love it. So being that I have a Taurus 9th house stellium, I like knowledge that is rooted in a system, that's rooted in tradition and rooted in history. So for those of you who aren't familiar, Benabel Wynn depicts a variety of cultures and religious philosophies and theologies in this deck. But her, the book that you can buy with it, which is called the Book of Maps, is over 1,000 pages long. And so it shows a deep depth of research that I think my Taurus self would appreciate, my Taurus stellium would appreciate. There's that need for learning and the desire to learn, but I want it to be rooted in something that's real. I want it to be rooted in something that I can learn about, a system that I can constantly study. And this does this. And it, of course, introduces me to different cultures because that's the purpose of the deck. When you work with this deck, or when I work with this deck, I feel a sense of adventure because I'm journeying through the cards to learn about different groups of people and their beliefs. But yet I'm safely at home, right? That Taurus stellium would like. So I think that this deck really represents the importance of learning overall for me. It really is my commitment, and what I think that I'm here on this world to do is to learn and to teach in a similar way that this deck's philosophy is set out in front of us. Okay, so So this was my introduction to myself using my major astrology placements. I know that this is something that's multi-layered, but really it starts with loading your birth date, your birth time, and your birth location into an app. You can go to various websites online. I'll post a link in the description box below to a free one, and just reading what it has to say about all of these different placements. So I think it's an interesting way to explore yourself, but also to see your decks through different lenses. You can probably tell that all of the decks that I picked I've had for a really long time. They're decks that I've really bonded with, so I have a good sense of it. So I think it's just a matter of like starting there, learning more about yourself, and then trying to fit the decks within that lens. So like I said, I'm not someone who's an astrologer. I am definitely someone who's like a base level astrology person. So I know this probably didn't represent all of the nuances, but I felt it was important for me to focus on the ones that applied most to myself so I could teach you about me. So I'm going to title this hashtag Astro Intro, and if any of you would love to play along, I would be so glad to watch your replies. I really love being part of this YouTube community and seeing what everyone has to say, and so I appreciate y'all so much, and I hope that y'all have a beautiful day.